I'm thrilled to have a special guest with us today. I have my goddaughter, Ariel Debeniotis, with us. She is a junior in high school, is 16 years old. And today we're going to be talking about what else but generation gap. And we're going to be talking about this new generation that's coming in. I don't even know what your generation is called. Do you?
Gen Z.
Are you Gen Z?
Yeah.
All right. So I don't know. With Z, that's probably what comes after Gen Z? I don't even know.
Alphas.
Oh, alphas.
They're actually starting their freshman year in high school.
Oh, well, thank you. See, we're getting an education on the generations. I'm getting confused. X, Y, Z, you know. I'm Generation X, and so then there's Y, and then there's Z, and millennials, and I'm just told.
Boomers.
And boomers, right? And then now there's alphas. But you're in Generation Z. So we're going to learn about what the Generation Z is thinking about the workplace and what Generation Z is facing in terms of just daily struggles and daily thoughts. So thank you for being here. I'm so excited again.
Yeah.
Now, Ariel was my special guest when she was, how old were you? You were 12? I think actually when you were in 5th grade. We did our first podcast
I was
video.
Like 11 at that
You were 11.
10 or 11.
Yeah.
I think.
And we talked about leadership lessons from a 5th grader. So if you haven't seen that episode, you should definitely go back and watch that because you'll see the progression of now we have a young lady who's 16 years old from the time she was 11. She's been on the show. So, and you always have had like these amazing insights. I'm like, I know your parents, right? I've known her parents since we were kids. And I know how mature they are and how wonderful they are. But also, you've had this wisdom since you were 11, so I don't know where that comes from. It's just amazing. So today, I want to start out. This summer, you had your first job. So say a little bit about that experience and what that was like. And we're not going to talk about your job, but what was it like working for the first time? I mean, how did you feel?
It was definitely because it's the first job I've managed on my own because I did this very small kind of job the previous summer, but it wasn't anything like as high of a responsibility as this one is. And I think it's just it's different because you can't really get around people that you might not like or like, you kind of have to work with people. And it's funny because some people, they are living off of that salary while some people are just doing it before they go to college.
Right. So some people, it's their living, and for you, it's kind of like a part-time. What are you working, 20 hours, I think, for the summer? Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about what you think makes an ideal manager. Because now that you've had managers and you're having to learn and you're embarrassed to ask questions or whatever. Talk to me a little bit about that because the people that are listening to this podcast are people who are in leadership roles.
I think one thing that I'm very glad about in this position that I am is that the place I work for has multiple managers for different things. So we have our main store manager and then under we have a few other managers. So it's kind of like, well, in school, how you have a lot of counselors, you might have one that you like more. And that's kind of like a person that you can feel more trust with, you feel better talking to things about with, and then they can talk to, let's say you're having a problem like at school with a teacher.
Yeah.
You can talk to that counselor, and they might not be your counselor, but they could still talk to your counselor and have your counselor talk to the teacher. So it just gives you another like safe person, almost like safe adult person that you feel comfortable talking to, because not all of them, I don't know all of them. I'm glad that my first job where I manage it all by myself, I have that opportunity to have so many people who are managers, because it gives me like, oh, well, I don't know this manager, that's okay, or oh, this manager and me, we don't really get along, that's okay, but I can find someone who I get along with and who is helpful and who I trust enough to talk about anything with.
Yeah, and see, that's interesting. I think that's a really interesting concept for a lot of people listening, because we're in the traditional leadership roles, and usually there's a manager, and usually there's one manager. And so what you're saying is that it's nice to have multiple people that you can go to. So that if you don't like your manager, and it doesn't mean that you don't like them, but if you don't feel comfortable or the style doesn't match you, you have somebody else to go to. That's a really interesting concept. So and that's not the norm. I mean, it's probably the norm in where you were in retail.
We have it kind of goes our store manager, and then branching out, you have multiple other managers, and then branching out is all the employees. So it's kind of like that. There's still one head of everybody, but
you get to go to different people.
Yeah.
Oh.
All the managers still have like power, and then the one who makes final decisions, all of that, manages everything else, is our store manager.
So that's something interesting to be thinking about, folks, is that we're focused on this model where we're thinking about the manager and then the employees. And then if the employees don't get along with the manager and there's employee engagement issues, it's like all the manager's fault. And so I think what Ariel is telling us, which is really interesting, is that it's nice to be able to have options so that if I feel comfortable with one person, I can go to that person and still get guidance and all of that in my chain of command. Right?
Yeah.
What are you looking for in a manager? Because you're going to a job, you're new. What did you want the manager to be doing so that make you feel comfortable and engaged and happy about going to work?
I think just being able to be flexible.
And what's flexible? Like, what do you mean by flexible?
Like, able to work around your needs, kind of.
Okay. And so what would what's like a typical, like, what do you mean? Like, what would that be? See, I'm asking you all these questions, but so we understand.
Well, like, scheduling you when you're able, like...
Right, so scheduling, right? So in your environment, because you're working retail, is being flexible, like, okay, I have something to do. Okay, so is that important to you, to have the flexibility of when to work? That is important.
Yeah. I think because everyone else has, like, other things going on in their life. And like I said, some people raise families off of the salaries, too.
Right.
So they might, like, let's say their kid is sick. Hypothetically. What are you supposed to do? Let's say you're a single parent, your kid is sick, and you have to be the one to take care of them.
Right.
But you're scheduled for work, and you can't.
So what would be flexible? What would the manager do to, like, my kid's sick. What would you expect the manager to do in that case?
Find someone to come in, or like you can swap shifts with another coworker.
Right.
Or you could, or like even if the manager is willing, he could, if he has enough staff, let's say usually they have 4 employees and the manager, if he can go 3 employees and then him, he can just do that. Because I've seen that sometimes too.
Well, that's great. So what I'm hearing, okay, so flexibility is important. Talk to me a little bit about style. So what style is like a don't for a manager, do you think? Like, do not do this. It's not that your manager ever did this, but like, oh gosh, I would hate my job. I would hate coming to work. I don't want to come here with you anymore. What would the manager be like?
And this actually happens at my work too.
Don't talk about your work. This is like, we're not talking about Ariel's work. We're just talking about what you
putting a lot of tasks onto them that they're meant to do.
Oh, okay. So delegation. So they're giving you stuff. They said the job is one thing, and they give you stuff. Now, what if they're saying, hey, we want you to handle all this stuff?
Well, if they offer and ask you to do it, that's different. But it's different. Asking and telling is different.
Okay. So tell me more about that. So you go in, they tell you this is what your job is. And then the don't do is then they give you all this other stuff that they never told you that they were going to give you. Right? Yeah. Is that what you're saying? Why is that annoying?
Because you didn't sign up for all the extra stuff that they're giving you. Even if you're like, oh yeah, I don't mind doing that. You still didn't.
Right. That's not what they said the job was.
You didn't agree to it. Yeah.
Right. Just knowing, because I work with a lot of managers and stuff, they'll say, well, you're learning. And so we're trying to give you opportunities to develop and grow. And you come in and there's work that needs to be done and the job changes. So why are you expecting only these things? That we may need you to do also these things. So why aren't you flexible? What would you say? You want me to be flexible, but you're not being flexible.
I think that if it's somewhat like similar to your actual job, that's fine. But if it has to be reasonable. Like if it's learning more stuff that have to do with your job and like your role, then that's, okay. But if it's like something completely different, a different department or something that like they don't teach you and they expect you to do.
Teaching. Okay, that's an important part. Now tell me, that's a good one. So let's grab that, because I think that's an important one for us to hear. Teaching. What is important to you about learning and teaching? I mean, what do you expect the manager and the folks that are running the place to teach you?
Basically how to do your job, I think, in a sense. 'Cause, like, they teach you what to say, maybe some strategies to how to do it, how things work, where you can find like your pay, scheduling, any information to contact any managers, like anything. You don't just go in there knowing.
And how does that impact or affect how you like the job? Like if you go in there and they just kind of say, here you go, Ariel, here's your, read this stuff and go. I mean, how do you feel when you don't get that support?
I think, because I'm also a visual learner too. So I think it's definitely a lot harder. And I feel like I ask a lot of questions if I don't see it.
Right.
And then it just annoys them, obviously. But it's like you didn't do it multiple ways. Like you didn't incorporate pictures, you just did. Like, let's say they printed out an article, said read this. Like how to work, let's say a printer. Like a printer manual. Like they didn't show you.
Right.
It would be so much easier to show too.
Right. So the manager has to be involved. Is what I'm hearing, is that you got to train people. You got to show them how to do things. I mean, these are basics. These are so basic, but it's interesting to hear it from you and your experience coming in, because we expect that people are going to teach us how to do things to make us successful. And there's, trust me, because this is what I do for a living. Yeah. People walk into workplaces and the manager says, oh, here's your desk. Here's what you do. Here, read this manual and go. And what do you want from a job? Like, when you go into a job, because a lot of people listening are saying your generation is lazy, that you're kind of spoiled. Please don't take it wrong. I don't think you're lazy. You got a 16-year-old and he has a job. That's pretty good. Yeah. But they say your generation is lazy. What would you say about that? Do you think that's true, or do you think it's misunderstood?
I think it's a lot misunderstood.
Okay.
I think because it doesn't just have to do with the work itself. It has to do with like the amount they're getting paid, and like most people can't afford houses anymore. Right. They can't afford rent. They can, and all of that, and groceries, and all of that. So I think
things are expensive.
Yeah.
Right.
Inflation. Yeah. And just like all of that, and I think that, or even the price of college too.
Oh, that's true.
And it's like, I think that because we don't show as much effort, it is seen as like, oh well, they should already be at this destination. Like when I was their age, I had already bought in a house. You
hear all this, right?
Yeah. Or like I already, paid off all my college student loans. Like I did all of that by their age. But like you don't make that much, and you kind of have to pick, do you want to feed yourself or do you want to buy a house then? Right. Assuming that you're already renting somewhere, like do you want to move into another house or do you want to feed yourself? Right. So I think that is also a big thing too.
So what I hear you say is that there's also the pressures of the environment that you're living in now is different. Yeah. And so, but you did mention, and I'm going to ask you a little bit more about this. You said because it doesn't seem like we're putting in effort. And what do you mean by that?
I think because a lot of people have this idea that I worked so hard when I was their age, and like I got to where I was, like they should be there by, like they expect their life to be parallel, like person A's life should be parallel person B's. Right. And like they go the same path, they make the same amount, they like progress the same way, they pay off debt same like all of that
Right.
at the same time as when they did when their age, and they don't think about the fact that times have
Change.
evolved and changed.
Yeah, and so it's not the same context, is what I hear you saying, which is really that's a really good point. But it sounds like, okay, so here's what I hear from leaders that I talk to. They say, oh well, these probably not your I don't think it's your generation, but the generation before you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Y people coming in, they're like, they expect to be promoted right away. It's like, well, I had to work, until I had to pay my dues, and why do they they don't want to do a boring job, and they want everything to be so great. Do you think that's true?
I don't hear about that.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. I mainly just hear about the Gen Z stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, yeah. But yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I also don't have anyone that age
Right.
in my life that talks about it.
Yeah. So
To
Gen
me-
Z more, you think it's just you're feeling pressure, it sounds like, of living up to these expectations of what everybody else is saying that you should have done.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so now that we're talking about pressure and expectations, we're going to shift gears when we talk about the workplace a little bit. Now I want to just talk about just growing up and living, right? Because I think how we're socialized really impacts the workplace. It impacts everything. Talk to me a little bit about what you think the pressures are being a young girl, right? They're 16 years old, being socialized in today's world.
I think being able to, I think just everything that people do is always not like, oh, well, she shouldn't have done this, she shouldn't have done that. And it's just, there's so much expectation to be this perfect person, and each individual person's mind, whatever perfect is,
Right.
to that person.
Right.
And it's like you have to meet these different standards, and it's like everywhere there's like, you gotta be this but not that. But then you have to switch and be the opposite somewhere else. And
It sounds like, I'm sorry, but you know what that sounds like? It sounds like, I don't know whoever saw the Barbie movie, but there's a
yeah.
big thing that what is her name? I forgot her name. Ferreira says, one of the characters says about what girls face, right? Women face. So you got to be this, but not this. I mean, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah. And it's like depending on the environment you're into, whether that's school, work, just your house. From that to all the way, like people in your life, like parents, siblings, friends, significant others. Like there's so many different people that you have to meet their expectation for.
Do you think it's harder? You hear a lot that it's harder for girls. Do you think that's true? I don't know.
I think sometimes it is. I think also because girls tend to be seen as the weaker gender. Men trying to just sexualize me.
Yeah.
And like think of me in ways that is illegal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you're 16,
Yeah,
right? I
well,
mean, think about that.
it's-
That's a lot of pressure.
The first experience I remember, I think, was before my freshman year.
Really?
Yeah. That's, I think, the first experience I remember. And then I just remember, like, oh my god, like, especially from what my mom would say about growing up in Greece and all of that. Like, I was like, okay, but this is, the United States. Like, it's different.
Right.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. Well, see, and that's but that's real, right?
Yeah.
And so girls face those types of things, and the more you're trying to break out of that mold, trying to break out of this weaker sex thing. I mean, you know me, I do a lot of research on gender and women and leadership. And one of the things that comes up a lot is that there's still these stereotypes, and it has a lot to do with the sexualization of women and at young ages, that it kind of almost impedes you. It's a detriment of getting confident, and and then you feel like you have to be perfect in that way too, right?
Yeah.
So you got to look good.
You gotta please people you don't even know.
Right. It's like, I got to look a certain way. That's stressful. So what do you think can be done about that, and how can girls combat that? I mean, how do you combat that? Because, you're a young lady growing up trying to do all these different things.
I kind of just stay to myself and do whatever I want, kind of, and I mean, there's going to be weirdos everywhere. There's going to be people I don't like everywhere. So I can't really get away from that.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of staying to myself, not so much like going out there, making a big scene, like trying to get attention from people I don't even know, like all of that, just kind of being more reserved.
Yeah.
And more like, I'm going to wear this because I really like it and not because I want to have these people look at me, kind of, and like get attention from these people.
Yeah. Well, that's a difficult one, because I think, you talk about this quest for perfection and how there's two different things we're talking about here. One is the perfection and how we have to be all these things to everybody. And then there's this piece of, hey, there's this piece that I don't even want, and I have to deal with. I have to deal with this issue. And we talk, it's an issue in the workplace too, right? And so these are kind of the things, it sounds like, that you're facing and you've got to come to terms with and learn how to deal with. And it's a lot. There's also this whole concept of mental health for people your age. I mean, mental health in general, but that there's an increase in mental health issues, anxiety, depression, all of those things. What do you think is contributing to that, and what's your experience with, people? You don't have to give us any examples or real examples, but do you see that, or what's your thought?
I think that just with all the pressures and like, it's just like after a while, it's like, am I good enough? Like sometimes people think that, and it's like because of they're trying to please other people and trying to be like, well, they might want me to wear this, but like, no, wear what you want, kind of. And I think that people also just don't get mental health help because of the price of it too.
Yeah, that's right. There we go back with that, right?
Yeah, it's so expensive,
right?
And it's not like something that they born wanting, because it's a lot of. I mean, yes, it can be developed early childhood, but it's also chemical in your brain too.
Right?
So some people don't even ask for it.
Right. Yeah, that's a complex one. I mean, we could do a whole episode on mental health, but I just wanted to get your thoughts. And I want to grab onto, before we go, because I know we could talk all day about all these things, but I just wanted to get your perspective because it's so fascinating. But the thing about good enough, because I think that is so big. I see that in my work with women who are adults. I see it with men. I see it with everybody, that it's this thing of worthiness. I'm not worthy. And it starts young. It starts really young. It's like, am I good enough? Did I meet these person's expectations? Talk to me a little bit more about that.
I think because, all my life I've been like, oh, I gotta meet this person's standard, whether it's, my parents, my teacher, yours, everyone.
Right.
It's like, I have to meet everyone. So it's like growing up, it's like, now, am I meeting my manager's expectation? Am I meeting my coworker's expectation?
Right.
Like, am I meeting my landlord's expectation of how the house needs to be?
Right.
Like, all of that. And it's just like everything that has another person involved, no matter who it is, it's like, am I meeting their expectation?
Right.
Am I doing everything that they want?
So I love this, right? So we're in this world of meeting everybody's expectations, and they're all different potentially, right? So it's like, okay, oh boy, now I'm hosed, because how can I do that? But then how do you ever develop what your expectations are for yourself? Because that's kind of the compass, right?
Yeah.
And I know you're at an age where you're still working that, but how do you start to develop your own expectations?
I think just kind of starting to be like, you know what, I'm gonna wear what I want. I'm gonna be how I want. I wanna go to this restaurant, let's say, because I like it better than this one, and just because this one's not as fancy, it's still good. Like, doing more of what you want, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a real,
because it's like you're accepting yourself, kind of. You're validating yourself.
Yeah.
Like, yes, I think that this is good, so I'm gonna go and do that, kind of.
Yeah. When you talk, Ariel, what I am hearing is, it sounds a lot like finding what your voice is. versus everybody else's voices in your head. Yeah. And that's a tough road, and you're on that journey. I mean, but I will tell you this for everybody listening, the work I do and when I'm talking to people, we're all on that journey still, because we all have those voices, and and most of the people listening are not 16, and they still have all the people's voices in their head. So this is really enlightening to hear it from you of how, also for those of the people who are parents who are listening, or who have, people in their lives that are your age, of remembering what that's like, because that's a tough journey to be on. So that's very, very wise from my young guest today. So my final question, I'm just going to ask you a couple of things that I ask some of my guests when they're on, because you've given us a lot of wisdom. For your 16 years, you're pretty wise. Do you have any motivational quote, or a saying that you want to leave us with, or that you would want people, or something that you would ask people to think about based on our conversation today?
I think just knowing that everyone, every girl goes through the same thoughts and everything, and it's that 90-year-old woman was once 9 years old, and just perspective, I think, a little more, because I think people forget that they were once that age, or they're going to be that age. It's even though, let's say you're having negative thoughts, doesn't mean that 9-year-old is not, kind of.
I love that. I love that. So I think that's a really great invitation for everybody listening, and for all of us to think about, is perspective. Is that, what is the other person feeling at that age? Because you were once that age, and on the other end, you will once be that age. And so not so much looking at it from age, but looking at it as the person. Yeah, that's really wise. Well, I always love this, right? I know we were looking forward to this. We've been, because this is something that I know you enjoy doing, and I love having you on the show. But I also love your wisdom, and I mean that, and you know that I mean that.
Yeah.
That it's just you're very wise, my young lady. So thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
And I'm sure people will really enjoy this episode.